He only ever had one goal. To wipe out half the universe. If he gets all the Infinity Stones, he can do it with the snap of his fingers.
Welcome to Kermode Uncut. Last week I did a blog, having seen Avengers Infinity War, which is a long film, about the fact that I was kind of feeling the need for intervals nowadays. When I grew up, you know, there was always intervals in long movies in the cinema. And I said, what do you think? You think intervals would be a good idea? It'd be nice to be able to have a comfort break, as people like to call it. There have been loads of responses. This from Alex Frias in Mexico. When I was a child, I remember that intervals in movies were a little bit annoying, especially because the movie was interrupted in the middle of a scene without waiting for a proper cut. I don't think it's a good idea to have them back, and many of you said the same thing. Many of you said, don't, no, gets in the way of the action, gets in the way of the drama, stop complaining. This from Tyrone Kubrick. Hi Mark, I live in Malta, one of the few remaining countries in the world where intermissions are standard procedure. Be it a 75-minute film or past 3 hours, a 10-minute break is always guaranteed. Some people stay in their seat, some leave to spend a fortune on popcorn and soft drinks. I would dare say that intermissions bring in more money to the cinema than an extra screening. I said that the reason they don't have intervals anymore is they want to get in as many screenings as possible, and obviously an interval makes the film longer. This from Daniel. In Switzerland, it's standard to have an intermission during every film. The problem is that because films haven't been made with an intermission in mind, they just suddenly stop at the halfway point. It's actually enjoyable having an intermission, just needs to be done a bit more gracefully. Now, many of you brought this up, the idea that intermissions are fine, but they have to be built into the fabric of the film. So this, for example, from Matt Kay, I would be fine with them as long as the filmmakers were aware that their film was shown with an intermission, similar to how stage plays and musicals have a clear-cut point at which the curtain falls halfway through, and intervals will only be jarring if their placement feels abrupt. This is kind of picked up again by Simon Dillon. Like Mark, I remember when long films were shown with intermissions, directors would deliberately design their films around these breaks. Lawrence of Arabia has an intermission at an appropriate point, for example. If we want intermissions back as a regular fixture in longer films, I'm happy with it as long as the directors and screenwriters craft their films accordingly, bearing in mind that there will be a pee break. And this from Tom. I've also seen Bollywood movies at the cinema which have deliberate intervals, and that's the key thing, deliberate intervals. This enhanced the movie for me as I was able to soak in the first half, have it refreshed in my mind before continuing on. I would have felt overwhelmed watching in one go. Now, of course, some filmmakers have already responded to this idea of the built-in interval. This from Lewis Brindle. I think we'll start seeing filmmakers use intervals as a dramatic device. The most recent film I can remember that did this was Tarantino's The Hateful Eight, and The Hateful Eight came up again from O.J. Brent. I recently watched The Hateful Eight for the first time with a break halfway through. Whilst not Quentin Tarantino's best film, I really enjoyed it. I've since learned that in the US, The Hateful Eight had a limited cinema release that included an interval, the roadshow performance. There is an extra on the DVD about it. I think the film is better for it, and I can think of a number of examples that would benefit from an interval. So that's a really interesting idea, the idea that you actually create the film in two parts, and the film is improved by having the intermission. This from Toronto Kev. Last film I saw with an intermission was Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet. And the lineup for the urinal was like an assembly line at the Ford plant. I can't speak for the concessions. This from Mark of Cain. The first film I saw with an intermission was Towering Inferno. I saw Towering Inferno at the ABC Turnpike Lane. I don't remember it having an interval. If my memory serves correctly, there was no unrest or opportunity for mischief taking place. I welcomed the break as it added to the suspense of how it would all end, and that seemed to be the attitude of those alongside me in the cinema. The interlude created a great sense of anticipation. Now that I really like, the idea that somehow the break has increased the tension. This from Karen writes, I would always prefer an interval if the film is over 2 hours long. I am also of a certain age, and so now avoid films with a long running time, except at our local independent cinema, which always has a break, whatever the length, and it never detracts from the action. So clearly, much to be said on both sides. I'll end with this, which is a kind of ameliorating post from Smollett. Tell you what, why not have a choice? Intervals for those that need such things, and screening over here without a break for those that can manage. I mean, we have screenings for parents and babies and for older folks over 60s, etc. So why not screenings with intervals? And it is true, you have multiplexes, they're showing various different versions of the film in 3D, in 2D. Why can't we have one version with intervals for people, as you say, of a certain age?